Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Michael was sitting in his favorite wicker chair, one already worn by time but still incredibly comfortable. It was a clear morning and the gentle breeze carried a subtle fragrance from the garden's flowers. He gazed out at the horizon where the blue sky met the distant green hills. His coffee still released a thin trail of steam above the table between him and Sarah, who as usual was absorbed in a magazine. To any observer, it might have seemed like a perfect snapshot of domestic tranquility. The table in front of them was carefully set, reflecting the couple's comfortable routine. 2 cups of coffee rested side by side, and the untouched plate of toast looked more like a decoration than part of their breakfast. Michael appreciated these moments, even if words were few between them. Sarah's presence by his side was enough to bring a sense of stability and security, something he valued deeply. But that day something felt different, though he couldn't pinpoint exactly what. Sarah seemed more distant than usual, and when he asked her the occasional question, her responses were monosyllabic. He figured it was just one of those days when she preferred to lose herself in her own thoughts. He didn't insist, he respected her space as he always had throughout their years of marriage. Then the calm was broken, not by a dramatic gesture or a raised voice, but by a casually spoken sentence. Sarah was still looking at her magazine, turning a page with the tip of her finger when she said, "Michael, what do you think about inviting Rebecca over for dinner? Something different, the 3 of us together, to try something new." The air grew heavier. Michael blinked, trying to process her words as if he hadn't heard them correctly. He looked at Sarah, but she kept her eyes on the magazine as though she'd just commented on the weather or some random movie. The natural way she suggested it made him question whether he'd understood her at all. His fingers tightened around the coffee cup's handle, and what had felt pleasantly warm before now seemed to burn his hand. "Rebecca?" he asked almost reflexively. His voice came out lower than he'd expected. Sarah finally lifted her eyes from the magazine, meeting Michael's gaze. In them, he found a mix of seriousness and something he couldn't decipher, maybe curiosity, maybe uncertainty. "Yes, Rebecca. I think it would be interesting, don't you?" Her tone was calm, but her words seemed weighted with a significance Michael couldn't ignore. The word "interesting" felt almost like a euphemism for something far more complex, something he knew he wasn't ready to face at that moment. Michael didn't answer right away. He placed his cup back on the table carefully, as if any sudden movement might shatter the fragile balance of that instant. He looked toward the garden, searching for a distraction, an escape, something to help him process what he'd just heard. But there was no refuge. Her suggestion lingered in the air, demanding to be acknowledged. "Sarah, what exactly are you talking about?" he asked slowly, as though afraid of her answer. Sarah sighed, setting the magazine aside. Her previously distracted look was now focused on Michael, and there was a certain firmness in her expression. "I mean, we have such a solid, stable relationship, but sometimes I wonder if we could explore new possibilities. Rebecca has been my friend for years, you know that. We've always gotten along. I thought maybe we could try something different together." Michael felt as if the ground had vanished beneath his feet. He didn't know how to respond. Sarah's words echoed in his mind, but he couldn't form an opinion or even a proper answer. All he knew was that this was not something he expected to hear, especially not on a seemingly ordinary morning while they sipped coffee on the porch. The morning breeze continued to blow, but for Michael, the air felt heavier, as though the atmosphere around him had completely changed. He looked at Sarah again, searching for some sign that she wasn't serious, that this was a bad joke. But all he saw was sincerity. Sarah wasn't kidding, and that frightened him more than anything else. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. Sarah's suggestion seemed to rewrite all the unspoken rules of their relationship, and he didn't know how to handle it. It was as if the small, safe, predictable world he had built with her was starting to crumble piece by piece, and he wasn't sure he was strong enough to stop it. The coffee, the toast, the breeze, none of it seemed to matter anymore. Michael knew that conversation marked the start of something much bigger, something he still couldn't fully comprehend but that was already beginning to change everything. Michael spent the rest of that day immersed in an uncomfortable silence, the kind that doesn't come from peace but from the weight of thoughts that pile up and refuse to clear. He tried to distract himself with simple tasks, organizing some tools in the shed, watering the garden, even taking a long walk in the nearby park. But nothing worked. Sarah's proposal echoed in his mind over and over. Each word felt like a piece of a puzzle he didn't know how to assemble. That night, after Sarah had already gone to bed, Michael stayed in the living room, sitting on the sofa with a forgotten beer bottle beside him. The TV was on, but he wasn't watching. The bluish light flickered around the room, casting shadows that seemed to mirror the chaos in his mind. He tried to imagine how they'd gotten to this point. Their marriage had always been solid, at least he thought so. There was love, companionship, and a comfortable routine. So why did this feel like it had appeared out of nowhere, like an unexpected earthquake shaking the foundations of everything he knew? In the days that followed, Michael realized he couldn't ignore what he was feeling. Sarah's proposal wasn't something he could brush aside. It had deeply unsettled him, not just because it was so unusual, but because it made him question everything: what Sarah really wanted, how well he knew her, and even how well he understood himself. He started avoiding any direct confrontation with her. Their conversations were brief, about trivial matters like dinner or the bills. He needed time and space to understand what was happening inside him. Michael, who always took pride in being practical and rational, now found himself confused and vulnerable. He had no answers to the questions tormenting him, and that made him feel powerless. One afternoon, while driving aimlessly through the city, he stopped in front of a small bar he occasionally visited with his best friend David. Michael decided he needed to talk to someone, and David was the most reliable person he knew. Entering the bar, he spotted David sitting on one of the stools, already halfway through a glass of whiskey. David looked up, greeting him with a warm smile and a nod. Michael approached and sat down beside his friend. The familiar scent of old wood and spilled beer on the counter brought a strange sense of comfort. For a few minutes, they chatted about casual topics, but Michael knew he couldn't avoid the real subject for long. He took a deep breath and finally said, "I need your opinion on something complicated." Noticing the serious tone, David set his glass down on the counter and leaned in slightly to listen more closely. With his hands clasped over the bar, Michael began explaining what had happened. He described the conversation with Sarah, her exact words, how it had left him stunned, and how he couldn't stop thinking about it. As he spoke, he avoided looking at David, focusing instead on a small crack in the wood of the counter. When he finished, Michael finally raised his eyes. David looked surprised but not judgmental. He stayed quiet for a moment, as if processing what he'd heard, before he finally replied. "Man, that's intense," he began, choosing his words carefully. "But I'll tell you something, you need to be honest, not just with her, but with yourself. You can't pretend this didn't happen. You need to decide how you feel about it without fear, because if you lie to yourself, sooner or later it's going to blow up." David's words echoed in Michael's mind as he drove home that night. He knew his friend was right, he had to confront his own feelings before he could deal with Sarah's. But the question was, what did he really feel? Did the love he had for Sarah outweigh accepting something that went against everything he believed in? He still didn't know the answer, but he knew he couldn't run from it much longer. That same night, as Michael returned home after talking with David, his mind felt clearer even though it still carried the weight of uncertainty. His friend's suggestion rang through his thoughts: be honest with yourself. But what did that really mean? He knew the only way forward was to speak openly with Sarah, even if it would be hard. The silence between them had been growing like a shadow over the past few days, and he feared that if he didn't break it soon, it could become something irreparable. When he walked through the door, the house was quiet. The living room lights were off, and the only light came from a lamp in the bedroom where Sarah sat reading a book. Michael paused for a moment, watching her. She looked calm, but he knew that behind that serene facade there was as much turmoil as inside him. He took a deep breath, gathered all the courage he could, and said, "Sarah, can we talk?" Sarah looked up from her book, surprised by the seriousness in Michael's voice. She set the book aside, adjusted herself on the sofa, and gestured for him to sit next to her. Michael hesitated but ended up sitting down, still feeling the weight of what he was about to say. For a few moments, they remained silent, the tension in the air almost tangible. "I need to understand, Sarah," he began, his voice low but steady. "Where did this idea come from? Why do you think we need this? I feel like there's something you're not telling me." Sarah sighed, as if relieved to finally have the chance to explain. She looked down at her hands, folded in her lap, before she began to speak. "Michael, I never wanted to hurt you, that was never my intention. I just felt that our relationship, solid as it is, might have become too settled. Rebecca came to mind because, well, she's important to me. I didn't plan this, it was more like a thought that slipped out, you know?" Michael frowned, trying to understand the layers of what she was saying. But before he could respond, Sarah paused and took a deep breath. What she said next caught him completely off guard. "I think you deserve to know the whole truth," she said, finally looking him in the eye. There was a mix of vulnerability and determination in her gaze. "Before we met, Michael, Rebecca and we were in a relationship. It wasn't casual or fleeting, we loved each other. And when we separated, it was because life took us in different directions, not because the feelings vanished." Her words landed with a heavy thud in Michael's chest. He didn't know what to say. This was a part of Sarah's history he had never imagined. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" he asked, his voice tight. "Did you think it wasn't important?" "At the time, it didn't seem relevant," Sarah replied, her voice filled with regret. "I was starting a new phase with you, and my past with Rebecca felt like something I had left behind. But Michael, when she came back into my life as a friend, these old feelings began to surface again. It's not that I love you any less, I love you deeply, but I couldn't keep ignoring the fact that Rebecca still means something to me." The silence that followed was deafening. Michael felt as though the ground had dropped out beneath him once more. What he had thought was a simple misunderstanding about expectations in their marriage now revealed itself to be something far deeper. He didn't know if he felt anger, sadness, or confusion, maybe all three. "And what do you want now, Sarah?" he asked finally, breaking the silence. His voice was calmer than he expected, but there was a firmness that showed he needed answers. "Do you want me to just accept this? Pretend everything's fine?" "No, Michael, I don't want you to pretend anything," she replied, tears welling in her eyes. "I just want to be honest with you. I want you to know everything so we can decide together how to move forward. Because regardless of Rebecca, what matters most to me is what we have. I don't want to lose that." Michael remained seated, absorbing it all. He knew this was only the first of many conversations they would need to have. But at that moment, all he felt was the weight of a truth that had completely changed how he saw their marriage. In the days that followed Sarah's revelation, Michael's emotions were on a roller coaster. He swung between trying to understand her feelings and fearing that his trust was beyond repair. Sarah, in turn, did everything she could to give him the space he needed while also making it clear she was willing to fight for their marriage. However, both knew that some resolution had to be reached, not a rushed solution, but something that would bring clarity to them both. One night, after a long day, Michael found himself sitting on the porch in the same spot where it all began. The wicker chair seemed heavier now, as though the time he'd spent there reflected all the accumulated thoughts. The breeze was cooler, and he held a cup of tea Sarah had left for him before going to bed. It wasn't the usual coffee they shared in the mornings, but somehow tea felt appropriate. He took a sip and finally made a decision. The next morning, Michael asked Sarah to talk. This time, there was no hesitation in his voice, only a firm, decisive tone. "Sarah, I think it's time we put everything on the table. We need to make a decision, not just about what you feel, but about what we are. Sarah nodded, a blend of nervousness and hope on her face. They sat in the living room, where the sunlight filtered softly through the curtains. Michael began to speak, each word weighing heavily. He didn't hide the impact Sarah's actions and revelations had on him. When you mentioned Rebecca, it wasn't just her past that resurfaced, it was as if a shadow fell over everything we built together. I felt like I didn't know who you were anymore. He paused, and Sarah's eyes, fixed on him, seemed ready to listen to everything without interruption. But over these last few days, while I tried to understand it all, I realized what scared me most wasn't Rebecca or your past with her, it was the idea that we might lose each other in the process. I love you, Sarah, and despite everything, I don't want to lose what we have. Sarah took a deep breath, and when she spoke, her voice trembled. Michael, I never wanted to hurt you. I never wanted this to put our relationship at risk. And if I have to, I'm ready to leave Rebecca in the past once and for all, not because you asked me to, but because I know what we have is more important than anything else. Michael watched Sarah as she spoke, and for the first time in days, he felt that her words were an anchor in the storm. I believe you, he said quietly. But we need to build something new. We can't just go back to what we had before. We need honesty, transparency, and above all, respect. Sarah nodded again, tears now rolling down her face. She knew Michael was right. This conversation wasn't an end but a beginning, a new attempt to build something stronger and more genuine. I'm ready, Michael. Ready to start again with you. What followed in the coming days was a joint effort to heal and reconnect. Sarah made the hard decision to cut ties with Rebecca, explaining that she needed to prioritize her marriage. Rebecca, though surprised, accepted this maturely, recognizing that Sarah's happiness came first. Michael, for his part, began making room to talk with Sarah about his own feelings and insecurities, something he had always avoided for fear of appearing vulnerable. Over time, the couple found ways to reconnect. Small gestures turned into significant steps, cooking dinner together, taking a walk in the park, even laughing at trivial conversations. Each moment seemed to bring back something they had lost along the way. They still had a long road ahead, but for the first time in weeks, both believed it was possible. That night, as they lay side by side in bed, Michael held Sarah's hand and said, "You know what I learned from all this? That love isn't perfect, it's a choice we make every day. And today, I choose you." Sarah squeezed his hand and smiled. "And I choose you, Michael. Always." Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.